The great chamber was the largest room Kim Yuna had ever seen. It stretched so high that clouds formed near its ceiling. 12 massive thrones circled the room, and on each throne sat a creature from a different world. Some had scales, some had fur, some had no face at all. They were the rulers of the Galactic Council, and today they would decide if Yuna would live or die. She was 17 years old. She stood in the center of the chamber with her hands locked in glowing cuffs that floated around her wrists. Her school uniform was torn and dirty. She had been wearing it for 3 weeks now, ever since they took her from the trade outpost near her home on New Busan. Around her, thousands of aliens filled the viewing galleries. They had come from across the galaxy to watch. Some whispered, some pointed, a few laughed. To them, she was entertainment. A small human girl about to be punished for daring to fight back. High Arbiter Kel rose from the tallest throne. He was Valeth, one of the oldest species in the galaxy. His body was thin and gray, with 4 arms and eyes that glowed like dying stars. When he spoke, his voice filled every corner of the chamber. "The human called Kim Yuna has been found guilty," he said. "She killed Toral, son of Ambassador Varric, heir to the 3rd house of Velith. For this crime, the punishment is death." Yuna did not cry. She had cried for the first week. Now she had no tears left. She only stared at the High Arbiter and remembered what really happened. Toral had found her alone at the outpost. He was tall and strong and cruel. He told her that humans were weak creatures, good only for serving their betters. When she tried to walk away, he grabbed her arm. When she screamed for help, he laughed and said no one would come. When he pushed her against the wall and reached for her, she found a metal pipe on the ground, and she swung it as hard as she could. She hit him once. He fell. He never got up. It was self-defense. Everyone knew it. But Toral's father was powerful, and the Valeth were founding members of the council. They wanted blood, and the council was happy to give it to them. "Does the human wish to speak?" High Arbiter Kel asked. His thin lips curled into something like a smile. He enjoyed this. Yuna lifted her head. Her voice was small but steady. "I defended myself. He attacked me. I had every right to fight back." Laughter rippled through the galleries. High Arbiter Kel waved one of his 4 hands dismissively. The Valeth have provided their account," he said. "Your species has been part of galactic society for only 60 years. You do not understand our ways. The word of a Veleth noble outweighs the word of a human child. That is simply how things are." From the human section of the gallery, a man stood up. He wore a formal black suit, and his hair was gray at the temples. This was Ambassador Park Do-yun, the official representative of humanity to the council. "I demand a proper review of evidence," Park said loudly. "Security footage from the outpost was never examined. Witnesses were never called. This trial is a mockery of justice." High Arbiter Kel's glowing eyes narrowed. "You will be silent, Ambassador. Humanity serves at the pleasure of this council. Do not forget your place." 2 guards moved toward Park. Oh, they were large creatures covered in armor, with arms thick as tree trunks. They grabbed the ambassador and began dragging him toward the exit. Park did not fight them, but as he was pulled away, he looked directly at Yuna. Their eyes met, and then, so quickly that no one else noticed, he gave her a single small nod. Yuna felt something change in her chest. She did not know what the nod meant, but she understood one thing. She was not as alone as she thought. The guards threw Park through the chamber doors. High Arbiter Kel returned his attention to Yuna with obvious pleasure. "The execution will be carried out in 1 galactic hour," he announced. "This broadcast will continue across all 400 billion connected systems. Let every species see what happens when a lesser being raises its hand against its betters." 1 galactic hour. Yuna did the math in her head. That was about 30 Earth minutes. 30 minutes until she died. The galleries erupted in excited chatter. This was what they had come for. A spectacle, a lesson, A reminder that power belonged to the powerful and everyone else existed only to obey. Guards came and pushed Yuna toward a holding cell at the edge of the chamber. She walked without resistance. Her legs felt numb. Her heart beat so fast she could hear it in her ears, but somewhere deep inside her, beneath the fear and the exhaustion, a tiny flame still burned. Ambassador Park's nod meant something. She was sure of it. What she did not know was that Park had already sent a message before the trial began. And it traveled faster than light, bouncing through relay stations across human space until it reached a place that officially did not exist. A command center hidden beneath the Pacific Ocean on Earth. The message was only 3 words long. They chose war. In that hidden base, a woman with sharp eyes and silver hair read the message. Her name was Admiral Choi Nari, and she commanded a fleet that no alien had ever seen. A fleet built in secret over 60 years. A fleet waiting for exactly this moment. Admiral Choi set down the message and walked to her command console. Around her, officers watched in tense silence. They all knew what was coming. She entered a code that had never been used before. Red lights began to flash. Screens lit up across the base. And then, in shipyards hidden in asteroid fields and abandoned moons across human space, engines began to wake. Humanity had spent 60 years pretending to be weak. They smiled and bowed and let the galaxy believe they were nothing. But they had never forgotten who they were. And now, because 12 arrogant rulers decided to murder a 17-year-old girl, the galaxy was about to learn the truth. Admiral Choi looked at the countdown timer. 29 minutes until the execution. She smiled. That was more than enough time. The broadcast reached Earth in seconds. It appeared on every screen in every city on every continent. In Seoul, in New York, in Cairo, in Tokyo, in places where it was day and places where it was night, billions of people stopped what they were doing and watched. In a small apartment in Old Seoul, Kim Sumin was cooking dinner when the emergency alert took over her television. She saw the great chamber. She saw the alien rulers on their thrones. And then she saw her daughter standing in chains at the center of it all. The knife fell from her hand and clattered on the floor. Her legs gave out and she collapsed against the kitchen counter, sliding down until she sat on the cold tiles. She could not breathe. She could not think. All she could do was stare at the screen and whisper her daughter's name over and over. Yuna, Yuna, Yuna. Her husband, Kim Tae-woo, came running from the other room. He was a big man with broad shoulders and rough hands. 20 years ago, he had been a captain in the military. Now he was retired and spent his days fishing and fixing things around the apartment. But when he saw his daughter on that screen, the soldier inside him woke up instantly. His face went hard. His hands curled into fists. He watched High Arbiter Kell announce the death sentence, and something cold and dangerous settled behind his eyes. Tae-woo, Suman sobbed. They are going to kill our baby. Tae-woo did not answer. He walked to his old desk, opened a locked drawer, and pulled out a communicator he had not touched in 15 years. It was military grade, connected to channels that officially did not exist. He powered it on, entered a code he still remembered perfectly, and waited. Across human space, the same scene played out in different ways. Parents wept. Children asked questions their families could not answer. Old soldiers reached for old weapons. Young people filled the streets in rage. The galaxy wanted to teach humanity a lesson, and humanity was learning something very different from what the Council intended. They were learning that they were done being afraid. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, Admiral Choi Nari stood in the command center and watched her fleet come to life. Reports flooded in from across human space. Ships that had been hidden for decades were powering up. Soldiers who had lived normal lives for years were receiving calls and reporting for duty. "Admiral," one of her officers called out, "the Black Fleet is at 60% readiness, full combat capability in 12 minutes. "That will do," Choi said calmly. "Begin Phase 1. I want every ship within strike range of the apex to decloak on my command. The officer hesitated. Ma'am, once we reveal ourselves, there is no going back. The galaxy will know everything. Choi turned to face him. Her eyes were steady and her voice was ice. They are about to execute a 17-year-old girl on live broadcast because she refused to be a victim. There was never any going back from that. The officer nodded and returned to his station. Around the room, men and women worked with silent focus. This was the moment they had trained for their entire careers. The moment humanity stopped hiding. On the apex, Yuna sat in her holding cell and watched the minutes count down on a screen mounted to the wall. 23 minutes, 22, 21. Each second felt like a year. Guards stood outside her cell. Through the energy barrier that served as a door, she could see aliens walking past and looking at her with curiosity. Some took pictures. Some laughed. One child, a small creature with blue skin and too many eyes, it pressed against the barrier and asked its parent why the human looked so sad. Because she is going to die, the parent said cheerfully. That is what happens to species who do not know their place. Yuna closed her eyes and tried to remember home. She thought about the markets of New Busan, where her mother bought fresh vegetables every morning. She thought about the beach where her father taught her to swim. She thought about her friend Minho, who used to walk her home from school before he died in that mining accident 3 years ago. She wondered if she would see Minho again soon. The thought did not comfort her as much as she hoped it would. A sound made her open her eyes. The guards outside her cell were looking at their communicators with confused expressions. One of them spoke into a device on his wrist. I'm asking questions in a language she did not understand. His voice sounded worried. Something was happening. In the great chamber, the audience was growing restless with excitement. The execution platform had been prepared at the center of the room. A massive machine stood upon it, a biomechanical construct designed specifically to end lives. Its metal arms hummed with energy, and a single lens at its center glowed with terrible red light. High Arbiter Kel sat on his throne and enjoyed the fear he saw on the screens showing Yuna's face. This was how the galaxy worked. The strong crushed the weak. The old species taught the new species their place. Humanity had been getting too confident lately, too ambitious. This execution would remind them that they were nothing. An alarm began to sound. At first, Kel ignored it. Alarms happened sometimes. Technical problems, false readings, nothing to worry about. But the alarm kept going, and then more alarms joined it, and then officers began running across the chamber floor with panic in their movements. What is happening? Kel demanded. A Velith officer rushed to his throne and bowed quickly. High Arbiter, our sensors are detecting ships, many ships. They appeared from nowhere. Ships? What ships? Whose ships? The officer swallowed hard. Human ships, High Arbiter, thousands of them. Kel laughed. It was a dry, unpleasant sound. Impossible. Humans have 12 registered vessels, 12 small, primitive vessels. Your sensors are broken. High Arbiter, The main viewport of the great chamber went dark. Not because the lights failed, but because something enormous had moved in front of it. Something so large that it blocked out the stars. Kel rose from his throne and stared. The shape outside the viewport was a ship. A human ship. But it was nothing like the small transports humanity had shown the galaxy. This ship was 5 kilometers long, covered in weapons that pulsed with energy, armored with materials that seemed to drink in light. On its hull, painted in white script, were human symbols that Kel could not read. They spelled a name, Immortal Phoenix. Every screen in the great chamber flickered. The execution broadcast was interrupted. A new face appeared, a human woman with silver hair and eyes like frozen steel. This is Admiral Choi Nari of the Human Defense Fleet, she said. Her voice was calm and cold. You have one of our children. You will release her immediately. You have 3 minutes to comply." The great chamber fell completely silent. Thousands of aliens stared at the screens with their mouths open. High Arbiter Kell gripped the arms of his throne so hard that his gray skin turned white. 3 minutes. The countdown had begun. And somewhere in her holding cell, Kim Yuna heard the message and felt the first spark of hope she had known in weeks. She did not know who Admiral Choi was. She did not know about the Black Fleet or the 60 years of preparation. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her people had come for her. High Arbiter Kell stared at the screen showing Admiral Choi's face. 3 minutes, she had said. 3 minutes to release the human girl or face consequences. It was an insult. It was an outrage. It was impossible. "This is a bluff," Kell declared loudly. I'm making sure his voice carried across the chamber. Humans do not have the power to threaten the Galactic Council. They are a minor species with primitive technology. This display is nothing but tricks and illusions. He turned to his military commander, Admiral Tharn, who stood near the base of the throne platform. Tharn was a veteran of 100 campaigns, a Velith warrior who had crushed rebellions across dozens of worlds. "Destroy that ship," Kell ordered. "Show these humans what happens when insects challenge gods." Tharn bowed and began issuing commands. Outside the station, the Velith defense fleet moved into attack formation. 200 warships, each one bristling with weapons, arranged themselves around the massive human dreadnought. They looked like insects surrounding a sleeping giant. On the bridge of the Immortal Phoenix, Admiral Choi watched the Velith ships approach. Her crew stood ready at their stations, calm and focused. They had trained for this their entire lives. "Admiral, the enemy fleet is locking weapons," her tactical officer reported. "They are preparing to fire." "Let them." The Velith fleet opened fire. Hundreds of energy beams lanced across space, striking the Phoenix from every direction. The attack was overwhelming, the kind of concentrated firepower that could destroy a small moon. For a moment, the human ship disappeared inside a storm of light and fire. In the great chamber, cheers erupted from the galleries. High Arbiter Kell smiled with satisfaction. The human ship was surely destroyed. The threat was over. Now they could return to the execution and teach humanity its final lesson. And the fire faded. The smoke cleared. And the Immortal Phoenix hung in space, completely undamaged. The cheering stopped. Silence filled the chamber like cold water. Kell's smile melted into confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked very much like fear. Admiral Choi's face appeared on the screens again. She looked almost bored. "Our turn," she said simply. The Phoenix fired a single beam of white light. It swept across space in a smooth arc, passing through the Velith formation like a blade through paper. 40 warships exploded simultaneously. 40 more lost power and began drifting. The remaining ships scattered in panic, their formations broken, their confidence shattered. The entire attack had taken less than 3 seconds. In the command center beneath the Pacific Ocean, the officers watched the battle through satellite feeds. A young lieutenant whispered what everyone was thinking. "We could have done this years ago." Admiral Choi had heard those words before, from young soldiers who did not understand why humanity had waited so long. The truth was simple. Humanity did not want to conquer the galaxy. They did not want war. They only wanted to be left alone, to live in peace, to raise their children without fear. But when someone threatened their children, everything changed. On the apex, alarms screamed from every speaker. Officers ran in all directions, shouting orders that no one followed. The audience in the galleries was no longer laughing. Many were trying to flee, pushing and shoving toward the exits. The live broadcast continued, now showing the chaos to 400 billion systems. High Arbiter Kell gripped his throne and refused to move. This could not be happening. This was not possible. Humans were weak. Humans were nothing. They had been nothing for 60 years. "Seal the station," he shouted at anyone who would listen. "Activate all defenses. They cannot board us. They cannot reach us." But even as he gave the orders, he heard new sounds echoing through the halls, distant explosions, metal being cut, and then, worst of all, gunfire. The humans were already inside. Lieutenant Han Minho moved through the corridors of the Apex with 11 soldiers behind him. They wore black armor that seemed to absorb light, and they carried weapons that made no sound when fired. Each of them had trained for a decade for this exact mission. They knew every hallway, every door, every security system on the station. And Minho had another reason to fight. Kim Yuna was not just a name on a mission file. She was the girl who used to walk home with him after school. She was his first friend, his closest friend, the person he had been thinking about when he made the choice to fake his own death and join the Black Fleet. He had watched her grow up through surveillance feeds and intelligence reports. He had watched her laugh and cry and become a young woman. And when he learned that she was going to be executed on live broadcast, he had volunteered for the rescue mission before anyone else could speak. Now he was here, less than 200 meters from her cell, and nothing in the galaxy would stop him from reaching her. "Contact ahead," one of his soldiers reported. 20 guards, heavy weapons, blocking the corridor to the holding cells. Minho did not slow down. Flash grenades, 3 seconds. His team moved like a single organism. Grenades flew through the air and exploded in bursts of blinding light. The guards screamed and stumbled, firing their weapons blindly at nothing. The human soldiers walked through the chaos like ghosts, putting down each enemy with precise, efficient shots. It was over in moments. The corridor was clear. Minho reached the holding cell and saw Yuna through the energy barrier. She was standing, her hands still bound, her face pale and thin. But when she saw him, when she recognized the eyes behind the helmet, her expression changed from fear to disbelief to something that looked like a miracle. "Minho?" she whispered. "But you died. You died 3 years ago." He removed his helmet and smiled at her. It was the same smile she remembered from their childhood, warm and kind and full of promises. "I had to go away for a while," he said. "I had to become someone who could protect you. I am sorry I could not tell you." He pressed a device against the energy barrier. It flickered and died. Yuna stepped forward, and he caught her as her legs gave out. She was shaking, crying, laughing all at once. "I thought I was going to die," she said into his shoulder. "I thought no one was coming." Minho held her tight and spoke softly. "We will always come, every human, everywhere, for as long as we exist. That is who we are. That is who we have always been." In the great chamber, High Arbiter Kell watched the security feeds with horror. Human soldiers were everywhere, taking control of the station with impossible speed and precision. His guards were surrendering by the dozens. His fleet was in ruins. His power was crumbling around him. He made a decision. If he could not have victory, he would at least have revenge. Kell descended from his throne and began walking toward the execution chamber. If the human girl was going to be rescued, he would make sure she did not survive the rescue. He would find her and kill her himself, even if it was the last thing he ever did. But when he burst through the doors of the holding area, he found Minho standing in his path. Yuna was behind him, protected, safe. Kell reached for her with his 4 arms. Minho raised his weapon and fired once. The shot took Kell's right hand off at the wrist. The High Arbiter screamed and fell to his knees, clutching the smoking stump where his hand had been. He looked up at Minho with hate in his glowing eyes. "You will pay for this," he hissed. "The galaxy will hunt you down. Every species will unite against you. You have made enemies of everyone." Minho holstered his weapon and looked down at the alien without emotion. "No," he said quietly. "We have shown everyone what happens when you hurt our family. The galaxy will not unite against us. The galaxy will remember this day and think very carefully before they threaten a human ever again." He turned away from Kel and put his arm around Yuna's shoulders. "Come on," he said gently. "Let me take you home." The broadcast had never stopped. 400 billion systems watched as human soldiers escorted Kim Yuna out of her holding cell. They watched as the great warship Immortal Phoenix dominated the space around the apex. They watched as the once mighty Galactic Council sat in chains on the floor of their own chamber. Admiral Choi Nari's shuttle docked with the station 30 minutes after the rescue. She walked through the corridors with a calm that made everyone around her nervous. Officers from a dozen species pressed themselves against the walls to let her pass. Guards who had terrorized prisoners for centuries suddenly could not meet her eyes. She found Lieutenant Minho and his team in the medical bay, where doctors were examining Yuna. The girl looked better already. Someone had given her clean clothes and hot food. Color was returning to her cheeks, but she still flinched at loud noises, still looked at every door as if expecting enemies to burst through. "I'm Admiral," Minho said, standing at attention. Choi waved him down and approached Yuna's bed. She sat in a chair beside the young woman and studied her face for a long moment. "You are very brave," Choi said quietly. "What you went through would have broken most people. But you held on. You gave us time to reach you." Yuna shook her head slowly. "I was not brave. I was terrified. I cried every night. I begged them to let me go. Being brave does not mean you are not afraid. Being brave means you keep going even when you are terrified. That is exactly what you did." She stood and turned to Minho. "Take care of her. Make sure she has everything she needs. And when she is ready, we have a call to make." 1 hour later, Yuna sat in front of a communication screen. On the other side of the connection, and displayed in perfect holographic clarity, were her parents. Kim Sumin was crying so hard she could barely speak. Kim Tae-woo stood beside her with his arm around her shoulders, and even his tough soldier's face was wet with tears. "My baby," Sumin sobbed. "My beautiful baby. I thought I had lost you forever." "I am okay, Mom," Yuna said, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled a real smile. "I am safe now. They came for me. Our people came for me." Tae-woo cleared his throat and tried to speak. His voice cracked twice before he could get the words out. "You did good, Yuna. You did so good. I am so proud of you." "I just did what you taught me, Dad. Never give up. Never stop fighting. Even when everything seems impossible." They talked for an hour. They cried together. They laughed together. But they made plans for when Yuna would finally come home. And when the call ended, Yuna felt like a weight had been lifted from her chest. She was still tired. She was still scared. But she was no longer alone. While Yuna reunited with her family, Admiral Choi had other business to attend to. She walked into the great chamber, where the 12 leaders of the Galactic Council sat in restraints on the cold floor. Guards surrounded them, but Choi dismissed most of the soldiers with a gesture. She wanted to speak to these rulers face to face. High Arbiter Kel glared at her with pure hatred. His wounded arm had been bandaged, but blood still seeped through the white fabric. Around him, the other council members showed various expressions of fear, anger, and disbelief. "You have made a terrible mistake," Kel said. The galaxy will never accept this. You will be hunted. You will be destroyed." Choi looked at him with something close to pity. "You still do not understand, do you? For 60 years we have watched how this galaxy works. We have seen the strong prey upon the weak. We have seen entire species enslaved, exploited, or driven to extinction because they could not defend themselves. And we decided very early on that we would never be victims." She began to pace in front of the prisoners, her hands clasped behind her back. "Every piece of technology we showed you was theater. Every ship, every weapon, every device. We let you think we were primitive. We let you laugh at us. And while you were laughing, we built a fleet that could humble any power in the galaxy. We developed weapons that your scientists cannot even comprehend. Yes, we prepared for the day when someone would give us no choice but to reveal ourselves. Why? One of the other council members asked. He was a small creature covered in scales, his voice trembling. Why would you do all this? Because we knew this day would come. Not the specific day, not the specific crime, but we knew that eventually some species would decide to hurt one of our people just because they could. We knew that if we wanted to survive in this galaxy, we needed to be strong enough that no one would ever dare threaten us again. She stopped pacing and faced Kel directly. Today you tried to murder a 17-year-old girl for defending herself against assault. You did this on live broadcast because you wanted to humiliate us. You wanted to teach humanity its place. Her eyes went cold and hard. Wait, you taught us something, all right. You taught us that we were right to prepare. You taught us that this galaxy needs new leadership. And you taught 400 billion systems that humanity will never abandon its people, no matter how far from home they are. Ambassador Park Do-hyun entered the chamber. He no longer looked like the meek diplomat who had been dragged out of the room hours earlier. He walked with confidence, authority, and just a hint of satisfaction. "Admiral," he said, "we are receiving messages from across the galaxy. Other species are asking what our intentions are. They want to know what comes next." Choi nodded. "Tell them the truth. We do not want war. We do not want empire. We want fairness, equal representation, laws that protect everyone, not just the powerful." "And what about them?" Park asked. I gesturing to the council members. "They will face trial. A real trial, with evidence and witnesses and proper defense. Not the mockery of justice they gave to Yuna." Kel laughed bitterly. "You will kill us anyway. That is what the strong do to the weak." Choi shook her head slowly. "That is what you would do. That is not who we are. Humanity does not execute prisoners. We do not believe in killing those who cannot fight back. You will face justice, not revenge. There is a difference." She turned and walked toward the exit. Halfway there, she paused and looked back. "By the way," she said, "your security recordings from the trade outpost, the ones that would have proven Yuna acted in self-defense, we recovered them from your classified archives. It turns out you had the evidence all along. You just chose to ignore it." Kel's face went pale. The other council members shifted uncomfortably. They had all known the truth. They had all chosen to condemn an innocent girl to death because it was politically convenient. "The galaxy is watching," Choi continued. "They have seen the recordings now. They have seen what really happened. And they have seen what you tried to do." She walked out of the chamber without another word. Behind her, the former rulers of the galaxy sat in silence, finally understanding that everything had changed. Across the stars, the broadcast continued. Species who had suffered under the Council's rule watched with growing hope. Species who had been classified as lesser, as inferior, as expendable, saw a new possibility emerging from the chaos. Humanity was not a conqueror. Humanity was something far more dangerous to those who abused their power. Humanity was an example. 3 months passed. The old Galactic Council was dissolved, its members awaiting trial for crimes against sentient beings. In its place, a new governing body was formed. They called it the New Accord, and it was built on principles that the galaxy had never seen before. Equal representation for every species, fair trials for the accused, protection for the weak against the strong. Humanity took a permanent seat at the table, but they did not try to dominate. Admiral Choi Nari, now retired from military command, served as their representative. Her first act was to sponsor a protection treaty for the 37 species that had been classified as lesser under the old system. Within weeks, those species had full rights and full voices in galactic governance for the first time in their history. On a cool autumn morning in the New Accord's Grand Hall, Kim Yuna stood before representatives from across the galaxy. She was 18 now, older and wiser than she had been when this all began. The fear that had lived in her eyes was fading, replaced by something stronger. 3 months ago, she said, her voice clear and steady, I was sentenced to death for defending myself. The old council had all the evidence they needed to know I was innocent. They had security footage. They had witness statements. They had medical records showing what Toral tried to do to me. But they chose to ignore all of it because I was human and he was Valith, because his family was powerful and mine was not. She paused and looked around the hall, and thousands of eyes watched her. Some belonged to species who had once laughed at her suffering. Some belonged to species who had suffered just like her. What happened to me was not special. It was not unusual. Under the old system, this kind of injustice happened every day. The powerful did whatever they wanted, and everyone else lived in fear. My case only became famous because humanity revealed what they had been hiding for 60 years. But there were millions of others who never got justice. Millions who never had someone come to rescue them. Her voice grew stronger. I stand here today not just as a survivor, but as a promise that the new accord will be different, that evidence will matter, that every accused will have a fair trial, that the powerful will no longer be able to crush the weak simply because they can. My case is now the foundation for new laws that will protect every being in this galaxy, no matter how small, no matter how young, no matter how unimportant others think they are. When she finished speaking, the hall erupted in applause. Not polite applause, but thunderous, emotional applause that shook the walls. Species that had been enemies for centuries stood side by side and cheered for a human girl who had changed everything. After the session ended, Yuna found Lieutenant Han Minho waiting for her outside the hall. He was still in uniform, though he had been offered promotion after promotion in the months since the rescue. He had turned them all down. He preferred to stay in the field, protecting frontier colonies, doing the work that mattered. That was a good speech, he said with a small smile. I was terrified, she admitted. Public speaking is almost as scary as being executed. Almost, he agreed, and they both laughed. They walked together through the corridors of the new Accord station. It was a beautiful place, designed to welcome every species equally. Gardens filled with plants from 100 worlds. Hallways wide enough for the largest beings and detailed enough to interest the smallest. Music from different cultures played softly in common areas. Are you shipping out again? Yuna asked. Minho nodded. Tomorrow. There is a colony near the outer rim that has been having trouble with raiders. They asked for help. Be careful. Always. They reached an observation deck that looked out over open space. Stars filled the viewport, countless points of light stretching toward infinity. But somewhere out there were billions of worlds, trillions of beings, an entire galaxy that was slowly learning to be better. I still dream about that day sometimes, Yuna said quietly. The great chamber, the execution machine, the way they all laughed at me. Do the dreams scare you? She thought about it for a moment. Not anymore. Now they just remind me how far I have come. How far we have all come. Minho put his hand on her shoulder. You know what the galaxy calls that day now? They call it the day the galaxy turned. Because everything changed. Because nothing could ever be the same after humanity showed what we were willing to do for our people. Is that good or bad? It is both. Some species are afraid of us now. Some are grateful. Some are still figuring out how they feel. But all of them know one thing for certain. Humanity protects its own. And that makes the galaxy a safer place for everyone. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. On the other side of the station, in a maximum security cell, High Arbiter Kell spent his days staring at the walls. His trial was still ongoing. The evidence against him was overwhelming. thousands of crimes across decades of rule, millions of victims who finally had the chance to tell their stories. A human guard brought him his meals every day. Her name was Lee Unji, and she was young, barely older than Yuna had been when Kel sentenced her to death. She never spoke to him beyond what was necessary. She never showed him cruelty or kindness. She simply did her job with quiet professionalism. One day, Kel could not contain himself any longer. As Yunji set down his food tray, and he asked the question that had been burning in his mind for months. "Why did you not kill me?" Yunji looked at him without expression. "What?" "When your soldiers captured me. When you had me helpless on the floor. You could have executed me right there. No one would have blamed you. It would have been justice." Yunji considered the question for a moment. Then she shrugged. "Monsters execute children," she said simply. "We are not monsters." She walked out of the cell and sealed the door behind her. Kel sat in silence, trying to understand a species that could build weapons capable of destroying fleets but chose not to kill a prisoner out of principle. He never understood, but he had the rest of his life to think about it. Back on Earth, in the small apartment in Old Seoul, Kim Suman was cooking dinner again. The kitchen was filled with warm smells and soft music. Taewoo sat at the table, reading news from across the galaxy on his tablet. He laughed at something and read it aloud to his wife. "Listen to this. The Velith government has formally apologized for the actions of their former leaders. They are offering reparations to every species harmed under the old council. Can you imagine? The Velith apologizing." Suman smiled and shook her head. "The galaxy has changed." "It certainly has." The front door opened, and Yuna walked in. She had been away for weeks, testifying before the Accord, giving interviews, attending ceremonies. But now she was home, and she looked more at peace than she had in a long time. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad." Suman immediately wrapped her in a hug that lasted a full minute. Taewoo joined them, and his big arms around both his wife and his daughter. For a moment, they just held each other, grateful to be together, grateful to be alive. "Dinner is almost ready," Suman said eventually, wiping her eyes. "Sit down. Tell us everything." Yuna sat at the table she had known her entire life. Through the window, she could see the evening sky turning orange and purple. Somewhere up there, beyond the atmosphere, human ships patrolled alongside vessels from a dozen other species. The first joint fleet of the new Accord, protecting a galaxy that was finally learning to be fair. "Ambassador Park asked me something today," Yuna said. "He asked what I was thinking when I looked at the stars." "What did you tell him?" Taewoo asked. Yuna smiled. "I told him that 60 years ago we looked up at the sky and wondered if we were alone. And now the whole galaxy knows we are here. And they will never forget it." Taewoo nodded slowly, pride filling his chest. "No," he said quietly. "They never will." Outside the apartment, night fell over Old Seoul. Lights flickered on across the city. Children played in the streets. Old people sat on benches and watched the sky. And far above them all, the stars burned bright and eternal, witnesses to a galaxy forever changed because 12 arrogant rulers made the mistake of threatening a human child. They had wanted to teach humanity a lesson. They succeeded, just not the lesson they intended.